They're everywhere in video games. Power-ups that make you invincible, parasites that end civilization, entire glowing ecosystems underground. So why are game developers obsessed with fungi? Because as it turns out, they didn't have to make any of this up. Mushrooms in games aren't random. Game developers pull from the real properties of fungi and translate that directly into game mechanics. And we accept it immediately, because on some level, it makes sense. We'll start with the darkest one, The Last of Us. Fungal infection wipes out humanity. Zombie apocalypse, right? This is Cordyceps unilateralis, a parasitic fungus that infects ants. It hijacks the ant's brain, controls its movement, forces it to climb high, and then kills it and burst through its head to release spores. Naughty Dog saw this in a BBC documentary, and Neil Druckmann, the creative director, said it was all based on the idea that the more numerous a species becomes, the more likely it is to be preyed on by this fungus. Humans are the most numerous species on Earth, so Naughty Dog asked, what if? They took the actual fungal life cycle and turned it into enemy types. Stage 1, runners, 2 days after infection, still looks almost human. Stage 2, stalkers, 2 weeks, fungal growth covering the face. They hide in shadows and ambush. Stage 3, clickers, 1 year in, the skull has cracked open. Fungal plates cover the eyes, blinding them, but they've developed echolocation, that clicking sound, that's them seeing you. Stage 4, bloaters, a decade or more, hardened fungal armor. They can rip fungal sacs off their bodies and throw them like grenades. But here's the detail that haunts me. In nature, infected insects seek out dark, moist places to die so the fungus can spread. In the game, infected do the same. They gravitate to sewers, abandoned buildings, underground areas. In nature, the fungus can enter a dormant state. In the game, you'll find infected attached to walls, hibernating, covered in fungal growth until you get too close. Even the Rat King, that horrifying boss in Part 2, is based on a real phenomenon. A Rat King is when multiple rats get their tails tangled together, fusing into one mass. The game applied that concept to infected humans, multiple bodies fused by fungal growth into one unkillable nightmare. The Last of Us is terrifying because it's grounded in reality. Cordyceps already does this to insects, but mushrooms in games aren't always the enemy. This is a glowing mushroom biome in Terraria. Everything here glows. And here's the kicker. This is real. Bioluminescent fungi actually exist. Mushrooms like Pinellus stypticus glow in the dark through bioluminescence. Scientists aren't entirely sure why. Terraria took this obscure fact and made it the core mechanic of an entire biome, a living ecosystem. You plant mushroom grass, yes, that's the actual biological term, and it spreads like real mycelium. Hit 100 blocks, the biome activates. Giant glowing mushrooms grow. Unique creatures spawn. Anamura fungus, hermit crabs with mushroom shells, fungi bulb, mushrooms that weaponize their spores, spore zombies, spore bats, spore skeletons, enemies infected by mushrooms. But here's the twist. In The Last of Us, fungal infection ends the world. In Terraria, it's a safe zone. The glowing mushroom biome is immune to corruption and crimson, the evil biomes that spread and destroy everything. Mushroom grass can't be corrupted. It holds its ground. And then there's the truffle, a sentient mushroom NPC, and his dialogue is incredible. He says, "You haven't seen any pigs around here, have you? My brother lost his leg to one." That's a reference to truffle hunting, using pigs to sniff out truffles underground. He says, as if living underground wasn't bad enough, jerks like you come in while I'm sleeping and steal my children. But then he says, I tried to lick myself the other day to see what the big deal was. Everything started glowing blue. The developers put a recreational reference in the dialogue of a sentient mushroom. One more thing, the background music for the glowing mushroom biome, that's a sample from Super Mario World. Because when you think video game mushrooms, there's only one place your mind goes. Shigeru Miyamoto said, Mario ended up being too big, so we shrank him. Then we thought, What if he can grow and shrink? It would have to be a magic mushroom. A magic mushroom. That term has meant one thing since the 1950s. Hallucinogenic mushrooms, and the English manual for Super Mario Bros. Actually called it a magic mushroom, not super mushroom. Magic mushroom. Someone at Nintendo of America had to know what that meant. Look at the mushroom design. Red cap, white spots. This isn't psilocybin. Amanita muscaria causes Alice in Wonderland syndrome, where your perception of size gets distorted. You feel like you're shrinking or growing. Sound familiar? Miyamoto mentioned Alice in Wonderland as inspiration. The mechanics are identical. Eat mushroom, change size. But it's deeper than that. In European folklore, mushrooms have always been magical. Fairy rings, perfect circles, mushrooms grow in. By the 1980s, the Amanita aesthetic had become divorced from drugs. The Smurfs lived in mushroom houses. That red cap with white spots just meant magical. But Nintendo wasn't completely oblivious. In Super Mario RPG, there's an enemy literally called Amanita, and in Yoshi's Island, there's Touch Fuzzy, Get Dizzy, a level where Yoshi touches fuzzy enemies and the whole screen warps. Colors shift, music distorts, and Yoshi stumbles around. That's the most blatant drug reference Nintendo has ever put in a game. It's probably a reference to the Colorado River toad, a frog that produces a DMT derivative on its skin. When the tongue comes into contact with the frog's skin, it causes a trip. The same thing happens with Yoshi. Here's why the mushroom works. Mushrooms aren't plants or animals. They're in between. In folklore, they're associated with transformation, with crossing thresholds. That's exactly what the mushroom does. Nintendo didn't have to explain this. It makes sense, because somewhere in our cultural memory, we know mushrooms do this. Miyamoto didn't invent the idea that mushrooms are magical. He just reminded us. Why do video games love mushrooms? Because they don't have to invent them. The Last of Us asked, what do parasitic mushrooms do to insects? And applied it to humans. Terraria asked, what do bioluminescent mushrooms do to ecosystems? And built a biome. Mario asked, what do hallucinogenic mushrooms do to perception? And made it a power-up. 3 games, 3 completely different mechanics, same foundation. By the time video games come around, mushrooms already have meaning. They're a ready-made symbol, a complete package that requires 0 explanation. Developers aren't creating these meanings, they're discovering them. Mushrooms have been doing impossible things for millions of years. We've been telling stories about them for thousands. Video games didn't make mushrooms magical, they just reminded us that they always were.